In a small apartment where money was tight, a 10-year-old boy named Alex found his world in the stories his dad, a janitor, told him about physics. His bright mind, a secret treasure, was discovered by accident when he met his dad's friend, a famous professor, and helped him with a difficult problem. Alex no longer played ball with kids his age. He was giving talks in university halls with professors. This was just the start of a life that would grow in ways he never imagined. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Alex saw the world in equations. To him, the world was a living textbook, a constant, unfolding problem to be solved. The worn linoleum of his family's kitchen wasn't just a floor. It was a surface governed by friction and inertia. The scent of his mother's cooking wasn't just comfort. It was the diffusion of molecules through space. At 10 years old, he was an anomaly in his own right, a small black child with knobby knees and a perpetually curious gaze, living in a cramped third-floor apartment in a bustling part of the city. He didn't have the latest video games or the trendiest clothes. What he had was a mind that hummed with the universe's silent language, a mind that could see the elegant logic hidden beneath the surface of the mundane. His fascination with physics wasn't a product of formal education. It was a gift from his father, David. David was a janitor at a prestigious local university, a man whose hands were calloused from years of pushing heavy carts and scrubbing floors. Yet, his mind was a repository of stories. Stories about why the cleaning cart, once moving, wanted to keep moving, a lesson in inertia. Stories about why a simple broom could lift a heavy pile of trash with ease, a demonstration of leverage. David never spoke of complex formulas or theorems. He spoke of the world as he saw it, through the simple, beautiful laws that governed his work. He'd tell these stories at the end of long, tiring days, his voice a gentle rhythmic hum that lulled Alex into a state of deep, contemplative thought. Alex's room was a testament to his passion. It wasn't filled with action figures or posters of athletes. Instead, his walls were adorned with hand-drawn diagrams of celestial bodies, crudely sketched blueprints for perpetual motion machines, and a large, fraying poster of Albert Einstein, his kind, wizened face a constant source of inspiration. His most prized possession was a stack of discarded textbooks his father had found at the university's library. They were old, outdated, their pages yellowed and brittle, but to Alex they were priceless. He'd spend hours poring over them, his finger tracing the Greek letters that danced across the page, his mind translating the abstract symbols into a vivid, tangible reality. He devoured chapters on classical mechanics, thermodynamics, and quantum theory with a voracious appetite that defied his age. His peers at school often saw him as an oddity. While they discussed video game strategies and playground dramas, Alex would ponder the principles of projectile motion during a game of catch or calculate the potential energy of a friend swinging from the monkey bars. His teachers, while acknowledging his exceptional aptitude for science, often found themselves at a loss. In a class on simple machines, Alex once raised his hand to discuss the concept of torque, a term far beyond the scope of their lesson plan. The teacher, a kind but flustered woman, simply smiled and told him to save that for college. The other kids, who had long since grown accustomed to his quirks, simply rolled their eyes. To them, he was just Alex, the kid who was good at math and always had his head in the clouds. The reality of his life was a stark contrast to the abstract world in his mind. The apartment was small, the walls a little too thin. He could hear the low rumble of the buses passing by and the distant sirens of the city. Money was always tight, a fact that was never explicitly stated but was always present. A new jacket, a fresh pair of sneakers, a trip to the movies, these were not things his family could afford. Yet, the absence of material possessions was overshadowed by the abundance of love and support that filled their home. His mother, a seamstress who worked from home, would often catch him lost in thought, a faint smile on her face. She knew his mind was somewhere else, exploring the far reaches of the cosmos. Their love was a constant, stabilizing force, an anchor in the swirling vortex of his intellectual pursuits. One rainy Tuesday evening, the kind of evening where the world outside seemed to be whispering secrets, Alex sat at the small kitchen table, his worn-out physics textbook open before him. The rain drummed against the window pane, a rhythmic percussion against the city's hum. He was trying to wrap his mind around the concept of wave-particle duality, his brow furrowed in concentration. The idea that light could be both a particle and a wave simultaneously felt like a beautiful, Impossible paradox. He scribbled a diagram in his notebook, a crude representation of a photon, and a wavy line representing its dual nature. His father, David, walked through the door then, his janitor's uniform slightly damp from the rain. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, but a smile instantly bloomed on his face when he saw Alex. He dropped his keys on the small table by the door with a gentle thud, the sound of brief, sharp punctuation in the quiet room. "Hey buddy," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "What's on your mind?" Alex looked up, his face lighting up. "Dad, can something be two things at once? Like, is it possible for a coin to be both a solid object and a probability cloud at the same time?" David chuckled, running a hand over his son's head. "I don't know about that one, son. That's a little beyond what a janitor can understand." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "But I know a man who might. I told you about my friend, Professor Harris, right? He's the head of the physics department at the university. He's working on some crazy theorem right now. I told him I had a kid who's a genius. He laughed and said he had to meet you someday. What do you say? You want to go meet him this Friday?" Alex's heart began to beat a little faster. He looked at the worn pages of his textbook, then back at his father's kind, tired face. A professor. A real, live professor who might understand the language of his mind. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. It felt like the beginning of something, a doorway to a world he had only ever dreamed of. He swallowed, the words catching in his throat. "Yeah, Dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, I'd like that." Friday arrived with the promise of a new world. The city hummed with a different kind of energy, a nervous excitement that mirrored the flutter in Alex's chest. He wore his best and only collared shirt, a hand-me-down that was a little too big on the shoulders, but he felt an armor of sorts. He wasn't just David's son today, he was a student of the cosmos about to meet a peer. The bus ride was a blur of motion and color, but Alex's mind was elsewhere, running through the possibilities of what he would say. Would the professor test him? Would he ask about string theory or the multiverse? He practiced his thoughts, mentally articulating complex ideas in a way he hoped would sound both intelligent and concise. When they arrived at the university campus, Alex felt as though he had stepped into a different dimension. The manicured lawns were an impossible shade of green, and the buildings were made of imposing ancient stone, their spires reaching for the sky like silent prayers. Students bustled past them, their faces a mosaic of different ethnicities and styles, all with an air of purpose and intellectual fervor. His father, David, walked with a quiet confidence, a man who knew every nook and cranny of this place but was not truly a part of its inner sanctum. He led Alex through a series of grand echoing hallways, the air thick with the scent of old books and something else, the faint electric tang of a lab. They finally stopped in front of a heavy oak door marked, Professor Eris Thorne, Ph.D. Department of Physics. David knocked twice, a firm, deliberate rhythm. The door opened to reveal a man with a wild, unruly shock of gray hair and a kind face creased with a permanent look of deep contemplation. He was wearing a tweed jacket with elbows worn thin, and a pair of glasses sat askew on his nose. This was Professor Eris Thorne. When he saw David, his face broke into a wide, genuine smile. "David, my good man, come in, come in." Eris's voice was a warm, booming baritone, a stark contrast to his slightly disheveled appearance. "And this must be the young man you've been telling me about. The prodigy, the genius, the one who will solve all my problems." He laughed, a hearty, infectious sound that instantly put Alex at ease. Alex's shyness, which had been lurking just beneath the surface, evaporated. He looked up at the professor, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and respect. He was standing in the presence of someone who spoke the language of his soul. Eris led them into his office, a chaotic but beautiful space that was a direct reflection of its occupant's mind. Stacks of papers teetered precariously on every surface, books overflowed from shelves, and a chalkboard on one wall was filled with a dizzying array of equations and diagrams. After a few minutes of polite conversation with David, Eris turned his full attention to Alex. "So, young man," he began, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "Your father tells me you have a fascination with physics. Is that so?" Alex nodded, his voice a little shaky. "Yes, sir. My dad, he tells me stories about how things work." "Ah, David's stories?" Eris said with a knowing look. He has a way of seeing the world in simple, elegant terms. But I'm sure you've gone beyond that, haven't you? Eris reached for a single sheet of paper on his desk, covered in what looked like a series of nonsensical symbols to an untrained eye. Let's try a little thought experiment. Imagine a particle traveling through a vacuum. The momentum is conserved, yes? Now, what happens if we introduce a gravitational field? The particle's path will curve. The question is, how do we represent that change in a way that respects the principles of general relativity, but can be applied to a quantum scale? He was speaking a different language now, one that Alex recognized from the old textbooks but had never heard spoken aloud. He looked at the sheet of paper, his eyes scanning the symbols, the Greek letters and the strange operators. His mind, which had been buzzing with textbook knowledge, suddenly went quiet. He didn't try to recall a specific formula or a memorized explanation. Instead, he just saw it. He saw the particle, a shimmering point of light, bending around an unseen curve in the fabric of spacetime. He saw the equations as a map, a guide to a territory he instinctively understood. Well, Alex said slowly, his voice gaining confidence. You can't just add a variable for gravity. It's not an external force, it's the curvature of the field itself. So you have to adjust the tensor field, the Ricci tensor, to account for the geodesic deviation. He gestured with his hands, creating a small, invisible curve in the air. You have to show the curvature of the spacetime manifold itself, not just the particle's path within it. Eris sat bolt upright, his kind, contemplative face now a mask of profound surprise. The smile was gone, replaced by an expression of intense focus. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his eyes locked on Alex's. The Ricci tensor? He said, his voice barely a whisper. You know what the Ricci tensor is? Alex nodded. It's a measure of the degree to which the volume of a body deviates from what it would be in flat space. A beat of stunned silence passed. David, who had been sitting quietly on a guest chair, watched the interaction with a mix of pride and confusion. He understood the words his son was saying, but he didn't grasp their weight. Eris, however, understood completely. This wasn't a rote answer. This was a deep, intuitive understanding of one of the most complex concepts in theoretical physics. This wasn't a child who had memorized a few facts. This was a mind that could think in the same abstract, elegant terms as his own. Good heavens, Eris murmured, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it. He looked at David, then back at Alex. The earlier joke about a prodigy had turned into a stunning, exhilarating reality. He picked up a large leather-bound folder from the top of a stack of papers and placed it on the desk. This, he said, his voice serious now, is what I've been working on for the last 5 years. It's a theorem that attempts to reconcile the seemingly disparate laws of general relativity and quantum mechanics. The grand unification theory, if you will. It's an insane, ambitious, and to be frank, likely impossible project. But the universe is a puzzle and I've been trying to find the missing piece. He opened the folder, revealing pages upon pages of dense equations, diagrams, and notes. We've hit a wall. A major, insurmountable wall. We're missing something fundamental. We've looked at every angle, every possible variable, every known particle. But we're stuck. Alex didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, his hands resting on the edge of the desk, his eyes alight with a fire that hadn't been there before. He was no longer a kid in a too-big shirt. He was a seeker of truth, and the universe had just laid a new puzzle at his feet. Professor, Alex said, his voice firm and clear. Can I look at it? Maybe a fresh pair of eyes could help. Eris looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. Not as David's son, not as a clever child, but as a potential partner in the most important work of his life. He smiled, a different, more profound smile than before. Of course, Alex, he said, pushing the folder toward him. Please, be my guest. The collaboration began simply, in the quiet chaos of Professor Eris Thorne's office. For the first few days, it was just the two of them, a man with a lifetime of academic knowledge and a boy with a mind unburdened by preconceived notions. Alex would sit on a small stool, his knees tucked to his chest, a single blunt pencil in his hand. Eris would pace, an open book on a theorem that had consumed 5 years of his life. He would gesture to the sprawling equations on the chalkboard, his voice a low rumble of frustration and intellectual exhaustion. We've tried every known approach, Alex. Every variable, every axiom. The math just doesn't hold up in this transitionary space. It breaks down. It becomes nonsense. Alex's approach was different. He didn't just look at the equations. He stared at them, his head tilted as if listening to their silent language. His pencil would glide over the pages of a notebook, not with complex calculations, but with simple, elegant doodles. A sphere flattening into a plane, a wavy line becoming a straight one. He was thinking in visuals, in intuitions, seeing the problem not as a mathematical puzzle but as a physical phenomenon, a story the universe was trying to tell. He proposed seemingly simple ideas, phrased in the vernacular of a 10-year-old. What if the field isn't just bending, Professor? What if it's twisting? Like a pretzel? Eris would stop pacing, a flicker of an idea sparking in his eyes. He'd rush to the chalkboard, scribble a few symbols, and then, slowly, a look of profound astonishment would settle on his face. Alex's naive question, his simple visualization, was often the key that unlocked a new line of inquiry, an entire avenue of thought the professor and his colleagues had never considered. It was a revelation. Alex wasn't just a clever kid who had memorized some facts. He was a natural. His mind saw the elegant solution without the intellectual baggage that had bogged down years of academic rigor. After a week of these small breakthroughs, Harris knew this was no joke. This was an honest-to-goodness partnership. He had hit a wall for 5 years, but in 5 days with Alex he had found the first cracks. He called his colleagues. 6 of the most brilliant minds in the physics department were convened in his office, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. They were a formidable group. Dr. Anya Sharma, an expert in quantum mechanics with a reputation for a razor-sharp mind, Dr. Ben Carter, a celebrated cosmologist, and 4 others, each a luminary in their respective fields. They arrived to find a 10-year-old boy sitting at the professor's desk, sipping from a glass of water, a look of serene contemplation on his face. Dr. Sharma was the first to speak, her tone polite but firm. Eris, with all due respect, what is this? I cancelled a meeting to discuss a child's doodle? No, Eris said, his voice unusually grave. You cancelled a meeting to discuss the single greatest breakthrough we've had on this theorem in 5 years. You're about to meet our new collaborator. The first session was tense. The professors presented their work, their years of accumulated knowledge and frustration, and Alex listened. He didn't interrupt. He simply absorbed the information, his mind a sponge soaking up a torrent of data. When Eris finally prompted him, Alex began to speak, his voice soft at first, but gaining a clear, confident authority as he went on. He didn't speak of complex mathematical proofs. He spoke of the problem in metaphors, in simple, intuitive terms. He described the concept of a multidimensional knot in spacetime that the math was failing to account for. Dr. Carter, the cosmologist, laughed. A knot? What are you, a Boy Scout? Alex didn't flinch. Sir, if you take a length of string and pull it tight, it looks straight. But if there's a knot in it, the string is still there, but the length is different. Our equations assume flat space, but what if there's a knot? The equations won't show it, but the field will still feel it. The room fell silent. Dr. Sharma, who had been watching with a skeptical frown, slowly walked to the chalkboard. She erased a complex section of a diagram she had drawn and replaced it with a simple, curved line with a knot in it. She began to scribble equations, her hand moving faster and faster. The other professors gathered around her, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Alex's knot was an elegant way of conceptualizing a topological problem they had completely missed. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. From that day on, Alex was no longer just a boy. He was their peer. The professor's office became a second home. Late into the evening, the air thick with the smell of old paper and fresh coffee, they worked. The chalkboard filled and was erased countless times. Mathematical proofs were written, torn up, and rewritten. Alex would often work silently, lost in his own world, his pencil moving in a furious, quiet dance across the page. He would find simple, beautiful shortcuts through complex equations, ways of proving a concept that had taken his colleagues pages of dense calculation. The final breakthrough happened on a cold Tuesday night, over 2 months after their first meeting. Dr. Sharma had been working on a particular set of equations, her frustration palpable. It's impossible, she muttered, running a hand through her hair. The numbers just don't align. Alex, who had been quietly working in a corner, looked up. Dr. Sharma, he said softly. You're assuming the particle is a constant. What if it's a variable? What if its spin isn't constant, but a function of the spacetime curvature? A light bulb seemed to switch on in Dr. Sharma's mind. She looked at Alex, then at the equations, then back at Alex, her eyes wide with a triumphant realization. She grabbed a marker and, with a final, furious series of scribbles, she connected the last two sections of the theorem. The math held. The entire chalkboard, once a testament to their struggles, was now a beautiful, coherent proof. They had done it. They had solved the impossible. There was a moment of complete silence, followed by a chorus of relieved, exhausted laughter. They clapped Alex on the back, shaking his hand, their respect for him now absolute. He wasn't just a genius. He was the key that had unlocked the solution. He was the one who saw the problem without the blinders of their collective knowledge. A week later, the professors gathered to discuss their next step. A major conference was happening in a month, the ideal venue to present their findings. The debate was fierce. Dr. Carter insisted that Eris, as the head of the project, should be the one to present. "It's your theorem, Eris," he argued. "Your name is on it. We can't just throw a child up there." "But it's not just my theorem anymore," Eris said, his eyes on Alex. "It's ours. All of us." He looked at the others, his voice gaining conviction. "We have to be honest about our process. The solution came from a place of uninhibited genius. From a new mind. We can't just take that and present it as our own." Dr. Sharma, who had once been the most skeptical, spoke up. "Eris is right. A standard academic presentation would be a disservice to the beauty of what we've done. We have to show them that science isn't just about years of research and degrees. It's about a fresh perspective. It's about seeing the world in a new way." She looked at Alex, a genuine smile on her face. "He's the face of that new way of thinking." The others slowly, one by one, came to agree. They weren't just presenting a theorem, they were presenting a philosophy. Alex was the embodiment of that philosophy. The final vote was unanimous. The professors would stand with him, but he would stand at the podium alone. The announcement was met with a stunned silence from Alex. He looked at his worn-out sneakers, then at the faces of the 7 people who had become his colleagues and his friends. He was no longer just a boy who saw the world in equations. He was about to share that world with everyone. The day of the conference arrived like a grand, unstoppable wave. The air in the city was crisp and cool, but in Alex's chest, a different kind of pressure was building. It was a nervous, thrumming energy, the kind he felt before a difficult test or when he was about to jump off the high dive at the local pool. He was dressed in a new suit, a gift from Professor Eris, that fit him perfectly. His father, David, his face a mixture of profound pride and nervous anticipation, walked with him to the conference hall. David wore a simple, clean suit, but in Alex's eyes, he was the king of the universe, the man who had given him the gift of seeing the world in a different way. The 7 professors, Dr. Sharma, Dr. Carter, and the others, met them at the entrance, a silent, formidable guard of honor. They looked at Alex not just with pride, but with a deep, almost reverent respect. The conference hall was a colossus of modern architecture. The lecture theater was a vast, semicircular space, the tiered seats rising up in a dizzying cascade. It was filled to capacity. The air hummed with the quiet buzz of anticipation. Prominent physicists, academics, journalists, and students filled every seat, their conversations a low, intellectual murmur. Alex felt a moment of pure, unadulterated terror. The sheer scale of the space and the collective weight of the minds gathered within it threatened to swallow him whole. David gave his son's shoulder a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "You got this, champ," he whispered, his voice steady. Eris led Alex to the stage, the 7 professors following closely behind. As Alex stepped onto the platform, a hushed silence fell over the room. His small frame was a stark contrast to the imposing podium, which seemed to swallow him. The microphone stand had to be lowered, a small, almost comical adjustment that brought a few gentle, nervous titters from the audience. He looked out at the sea of faces, 1,000 pairs of eyes all fixed on him. For a moment, he was just a 10-year-old boy again, standing alone in a room full of strangers. He took a deep breath, his eyes finding David's face in the 3rd row. His father gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Alex's fear dissolved, replaced by a sense of purpose. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about the theorem. It was about the beautiful, elegant truth they had uncovered. He didn't begin with a formal introduction or a complex thesis statement. He began with a story, the kind his father used to tell him. "My dad is a janitor," he began, his voice clear and surprisingly steady, the microphone amplifying it so that it reached every corner of the hall. "He taught me everything I know. He taught me about inertia, not from a textbook but by showing me how a heavy cleaning cart wants to keep moving. He taught me about leverage by showing me how a simple broom handle can lift a heavy pile of trash. He taught me that physics isn't just in books. It's in everything. It's in the way a ball bounces, the way a pot of water boils, the way the stars shine." The audience, which had been preparing for a dense, academic presentation, was captivated. They leaned forward, their faces a mix of confusion and intrigue. Alex then gestured to the vast digital screen behind him, which was now filled with the first page of their theorem. The dense equations were a stark contrast to the simple, heartfelt story he had just told. "For years, this theorem has been a mystery," he continued, his voice now filled with the passionate authority of a seasoned academic. "We were looking at the problem of unifying general relativity in quantum mechanics, and we were making an assumption. We were assuming that space at a quantum level was a straight line, that a particle's journey was a smooth, uninterrupted path. But the math as we saw it kept breaking down. We were all looking at the problem from the outside, but we failed to see the problem from the inside." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "What if," he said, a small knowing smile on his face, "the universe is like a length of string with a knot in it?" A low murmur rippled through the crowd. A few of the older physicists exchanged glances, their faces etched with skepticism. He ignored them. He was in his element now. He moved his hands as if shaping the air, illustrating the concept he had first explained to Professor Harris. "We were trying to find a mathematical solution to a physical problem," he explained, his voice becoming more eloquent, more assured with every word. "But the problem wasn't in the math. It was in the very fabric of spacetime. We weren't accounting for the twist. A tiny infinitesimal knot that distorts the path of particles, but is too small to be measured by our current tools." He moved to the next slide, a new set of equations that incorporated the topological concept of the knot. The equations were breathtakingly complex, but they were also, somehow, beautiful. The silence in the room was absolute now. The low murmur had ceased. Every person in the audience was completely engrossed, their eyes darting from the screen to the small boy at the podium. For the next 20 minutes, Alex walked them through the proof. He explained each step with a clarity and a depth of understanding that defied his age. He used metaphors and analogies to make the most abstract concepts understandable. He talked about the ripple effect of a pebble dropped in a pond to explain quantum entanglement, and he described the bending of a river around a large rock to illustrate the curvature of spacetime. It was a masterclass in communication. He wasn't just presenting a theorem, he was inviting 1,000 strangers into his mind, into the universe as he saw it. As he reached the final slide, a single, elegant equation that was the culmination of their work, the energy in the room was electric. He stood there, his hands resting on the podium, his voice full of a quiet, triumphant finality. "This theorem," he said, looking out at the crowd, "proves that what we once thought were two separate concepts, the large-scale world of gravity and the small-scale world of quantum mechanics, are in fact two sides of the same beautiful coin. The universe, in its elegant complexity, is a single, unified whole." He lowered the microphone. The room remained silent for a long, pregnant moment. No one moved. No one spoke. Then a single sharp clap broke the silence. And then another. And then a tidal wave of applause, a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the hall. The entire room stood as one, a massive, collective ovation for a 10-year-old boy. The professors on the stage, including Eris, were all smiling, some with tears in their eyes. David, his face a mess of emotion, was standing in the third row, clapping so hard his hands were numb. As the applause slowly died down, a wave of people rushed the stage. Journalists with cameras and microphones, professors with outstretched hands, students with notebooks asking questions. Alex was overwhelmed, a small, dazed smile on his face. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Eris. "You did it, Alex," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed them what we always knew was there." And in that moment, in the middle of a swirling vortex of people and flashbulbs, Alex knew his life had changed forever. The boy who saw the world in equations had just shown the world how to see. The possibilities were limitless. The universe as he knew it had just expanded. The applause was a hurricane and Alex was at its center. The stage, once a solitary perch, became a whirlwind of hands and faces. Journalists with microphones, their questions a rapid-fire assault. Academics with business cards and wide, disbelieving smiles. In the midst of the chaos, he felt a firm, protective hand on his shoulder. It was Eris, his kind, wild-haired friend, now his staunchest protector. The professors formed a human shield around him, gently but firmly deflecting the onslaught. They ushered him off the stage through a back corridor, and into a small, quiet green room where the world and its clamor could not reach. Inside, David was waiting, his face wet with tears of pure, unadulterated pride. The ride home was a quiet one. The city light streaked past the bus window, a blur of yellow and red, but Alex's mind was still in the conference hall, replaying the sounds and sights. He held his father's hand, the rough, calloused palm a familiar comfort. He felt as though he had just returned from a different planet, one where he was not just a boy from a cramped apartment, but a voice listened to by thousands. When they reached their apartment, his mother was waiting, her face alight with an expression he had never seen before, a blend of astonishment, relief, and immense joy. She didn't hug him as she usually did. Instead, she just stood there, her hands clasped, looking at him as if seeing him for the first time. The small apartment, with its worn furniture and familiar smells, felt different now, charged with a new, unspoken energy. They ate a quiet dinner, and for the first time in his life, Alex's parents didn't ask him about school or his day. They just watched him, their eyes full of a new, quiet respect. The world had shifted on its axis, and they were all trying to find their footing. The first ripple of the new reality came the very next morning. The doorbell rang, and his mother answered it to find Professor Eris standing there, a solemn expression on his face. He held a thick, embossed envelope. "This is for Alex," he said, his voice unusually formal. "From the university's board of trustees. It's important." Inside the envelope was a letter, thick with official letterhead. Alex sat at the kitchen table, his parents standing behind him, their breaths held. He read the words slowly, his eyes wide as he processed their meaning. It was an offer. An official, irrevocable, and breathtaking offer from the university. It stated, in eloquent but clear terms, that they were offering him a full-ride scholarship to their prestigious academic program, starting immediately. The letter went on to say that due to his exceptional understanding, he would be enrolled as a special graduate student, with a team of professors dedicated to guiding his research. They were also offering his family a comfortable apartment on campus, along with a stipend, to ensure he had the proper environment to continue his work without financial worry. The room was silent. A full-ride scholarship to a university? A graduate student at 10 years old? An apartment on campus? These were not just opportunities, they were a completely different life. His mother began to cry, soft, silent tears of a profound relief that transcended anything she had ever felt. David stood behind them, his face a mask of complex emotions. This was the dream he had whispered to his son, the world he had shown him a glimpse of, but now that it was real, it was terrifying. It was a world he couldn't protect his son in, a world he didn't understand. "Dad," Alex asked, looking up. "What does this mean?" David put a hand on Alex's head, ruffling his hair. "It means," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that you're going to be a professor. It means you're going to be a scientist. It means you're going to be everything you were meant to be." And just like that, Alex's education changed from a solitary, self-guided journey to a full-fledged, professionally supported academic career. His days were now a whirlwind of meetings with professors and other luminaries in the field. He was given his own office, a small, quiet room with a large desk and a whiteboard that he could fill with his own theories and equations. The other graduate students at first were a little wary. Who was this child with a suite of professors at his beck and call? But when they saw him in action, when they saw the way his mind worked, their wariness turned to awe. He would often join their study groups, listening quietly as they debated complex topics. And then, at the perfect moment, he would interject with a simple, elegant insight that would make the entire group fall silent, their faces a mixture of wonder and frustration. His social life, once a blur of schoolyard games and playground antics, now revolved around these intellectual exchanges. He still tried to be a kid. He would still play a game of basketball with the neighborhood kids on the weekends, but his mind was always a little bit elsewhere, calculating the trajectory of the ball or the kinetic energy of a jump shot. He wasn't just Alex, the kid with the funny habit. He was Alex, the genius. It was a title that was both a blessing and a burden. He found himself in a strange, in-between world, too old for the playground and too young for the academic halls he now called his home. The family's move to the new apartment on campus was a day of mixed emotions. The new space was bigger, brighter, with large windows that looked out onto the university's lush, green campus. There was a separate room for Alex, a space he could call his own, and a new kitchen that his mother had dreamed of. The move was a material improvement, but it was also a spiritual departure. They were leaving the life they had known, the life that had made them who they were. David had to quit his job as a janitor at the university, an almost poetic irony that was not lost on him. He was no longer the man who cleaned the halls. He was the man who had a son who owned them. He found a job in maintenance elsewhere, but his spirit was a little bruised by the change. In his new room, surrounded by the new, pristine furniture, Alex felt a pang of nostalgia for the old, cramped apartment. He missed the low rumble of the buses and the scent of his mother's cooking. He missed the little things, the simple things. But then he would look at his desk, at the new books and the fresh stack of paper, and he knew he was home. This was a new kind of home, a new kind of life. It was a life he was destined for. He began to draw, not celestial bodies this time, but the new world around him, the beautiful, complex equations that were now his language. The boy who saw the world in equations was now living in a world that was an equation itself, a beautiful, unfolding problem that he was more than ready to solve. He would still be David's son, still be the boy from the third floor, but now he was also so much more. The gradual rise had begun, and there was no telling where it would end. Life on campus was a symphony of new experiences. The sprawling university, once a distant fortress of academia, was now his backyard. He spent his days in lecture halls that were a world away from his old classrooms, his nights in a quiet, spacious apartment that was a world away from his old home. His days were filled with meetings and discussions, with the elegant dance of equations and the profound debates of theories. He was a graduate student now, a title that still felt alien and wonderful on his tongue. He was also a 10-year-old boy, and that was a part of him that was often forgotten. He would still, on occasion, ride his bike through the campus, a small, bright blur against the backdrop of imposing stone buildings and grand old trees. He would still, sometimes, draw constellations and planets in his notebook, but now he drew them with a new understanding, a newfound certainty. His relationship with the 7 professors, once a formal collaboration, had evolved into a close-knit intellectual family. They saw him not just as a genius but as their protege, their friend. Professor Eris, in particular, had become a second father to him, a guide in the labyrinthine world of academia. They would spend hours in his office not just talking about physics but about everything, about music, about art, about the universe's great unanswered questions. Eris would bring in other great minds to meet Alex, scholars from around the world, and Alex would sit and listen, a small smile on his face, absorbing their knowledge and their stories. The media attention, which had been a whirlwind after the conference, had settled into a steady hum. He was no longer on the front page, but he was a constant presence in academic journals and on intellectual talk shows. He gave interviews, always with Eris or another professor by his side, his voice still soft and unassuming, but his words full of a quiet, profound wisdom. He had been dubbed the boy who solved the universe by a major magazine, a title he found both funny and a little bit embarrassing. He was just Alex, a boy who was good at physics. His new life was a dream in many ways, but it came with its own set of challenges. He was a small fish in a very big, very intellectual pond. While his understanding of theoretical physics was beyond his years, he had a decade of life experience to catch up on. He had to learn how to navigate the social currents of university life, how to deal with the inevitable envy of some of his peers, and how to stay grounded in the face of so much praise and attention. He also had to learn a different kind of lesson, that a life in academia was not always easy. He would face rejection, criticism, and the constant humbling realization that there was always more to learn. It was a beautiful, complicated, and often daunting new world. And what of his father, David? The change had been hardest on him. The move to the campus apartment had taken him away from the familiar rhythms of his old life. He had quit his janitorial job at the university, and while he was proud of his son's accomplishments, he felt a certain unease. He was now on the other side of the fence, a visitor in a world he had once only cleaned. He found a new job in a different part of the city, a quiet, simple maintenance job at a large office building. He was good at his work, but his heart wasn't in it. His spirit was a little bruised and his mind was a little lost. He missed the simple conversations with Eris, the unspoken understanding between two men who saw the world in different but equally profound ways. He missed the familiar hallways of the university, the quiet satisfaction of making a place clean and orderly. His identity as the father of a prodigy was now his primary one, and he was still learning how to wear it. The family's old life and their new one began to merge in a beautiful, unexpected way. David, after his long, tiring days, would still come home and tell Alex stories. But now the stories were different. They were about the intricate mechanics of the new building he worked in, the complex wiring of a server room, the delicate balance of a new air conditioning system. He would tell these stories with a new sense of purpose, a new sense of pride, because he was no longer just a janitor. He was the father of a genius, a man who saw the world in its most beautiful and fundamental parts. Alex would listen, his mind taking in every detail, and he would often find a way to connect his father's simple story to a complex physics problem he was working on. It was their new language, their new way of connecting. One evening, Eris came over for dinner. The atmosphere was a little formal at first, a little awkward. But as the evening wore on, the conversation flowed, and David found himself telling Eris a story about a faulty elevator. He described the mechanics, the intricate pulleys and counterweights, the subtle but important friction that was causing the problem. Eris, his eyes wide with a familiar curiosity, listened intently, asking questions. Alex, sitting at the table, watched the two men, his heart full. He saw his father, a man who was once intimidated by this world, now sharing his knowledge with one of its great minds. And he saw Eris, a man who had once been a distant, abstract figure, now listening with a genuine, heartfelt respect. In that moment, Alex realized that his success was not just his own. It belonged to his family and to his father, the man who had given him the world, one small story at a time. The transition was complete. The new normal was here, and it was a beautiful thing. The dinner with Eris was a turning point. It had solidified something unspoken, a mutual understanding that transcended their different roles and backgrounds. From that evening forward, the professor became a regular visitor to the family's campus apartment. He was no longer just Alex's mentor. He was a close friend to the entire family, a man who would sit with David on the porch, a quiet, easy understanding passing between them as they watched the students walk by. He was also, in his own way, a bridge between Alex's two worlds. He would tell David about the complexities of a new research project, translating the esoteric language of physics into the more familiar terms of building and repair. And in return, he would listen to David's stories about his work, finding a kind of elegant, fundamental truth in the mechanics of a faulty air conditioning system or a broken sprinkler. The three of them, a professor, a janitor, and a genius, had formed a small, unlikely, and beautiful circle. And as that circle grew stronger, so did Alex's public profile. The university had, by this point, shrewdly leveraged his newfound celebrity. He was no longer just the boy who presented the theorem. He was a symbol of innovation, of a new generation of thinkers unburdened by old conventions. His face appeared on the covers of major scientific magazines, and he was featured in documentaries and news reports. He was invited to speak at other conferences, not just as a presenter but as a keynote speaker. The world was now listening to him with an intensity that was both exhilarating and a little overwhelming. He gave a lecture at a prestigious technology conference, speaking to an audience of tech giants and innovators. He didn't just talk about the theorem, he talked about the philosophy behind it, about the importance of seeing the world in a new way, of not being afraid to ask the simple, fundamental questions. His eloquence and maturity, combined with his age, made him a captivating speaker. The success, however, wasn't just Alex's. It was a shared triumph, and no one felt that more keenly than Eris. The professor, once a brilliant but largely uncelebrated academic, was now a celebrity in his own right. He was no longer just Professor Eris Thorne. He was the mentor of the boy genius. The media hounded him for interviews, and his lectures were now standing room only. He was suddenly a sought-after speaker, a revered figure in his field. He found himself on a new trajectory, one he had never dreamed of. His work was now being funded on a scale he had never imagined, and his colleagues, once peers, now looked at him with a mix of respect and envy. He handled it all with a quiet grace, deflecting praise and always without fail giving credit to Alex. "I am just the guide," he would say in interviews. "Alex is the one who found the path." Their partnership deepened. Alex became a full-fledged co-author on all of Aris's research papers, his name side by side with his mentors. Their work was now focused not just on the initial theorem but on its implications. The grand unification theory, as they called it, opened up a new avenue of thought, a new field of research that sought to explore the practical applications of their groundbreaking work. Alex, with his intuitive understanding, often found elegant, simple solutions to problems that had stumped Aris and his team for months. They were a formidable duo, a synthesis of a lifetime of academic knowledge and an uninhibited, unburdened genius. But with this new level of success came a new level of pressure. The world wanted more from Alex. They wanted him to solve the next big problem, to deliver the next breakthrough. The media was no longer just curious, they were demanding. They asked him about the future of science, about the great mysteries of the universe, and about his plans for a future that was already unfolding in a way that was far beyond anything a 10-year-old could have imagined. He was still just a child, and while his mind was ready for the world, his heart wasn't. He would often come home exhausted, his young mind reeling from the constant intellectual stimulation. He found solace in the simple things, in his mother's home-cooked meals, in his father's gentle presence, and in the quiet, familiar comfort of his own room. One evening he was sitting with Aris on the porch, the old man smoking his pipe, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and pine. Alex was quiet. "What is it, son?" Aris asked, his voice soft. I feel like everyone is waiting for me to do something else," Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. "Something bigger. Something more important than the last thing." Aris took a long, thoughtful puff from his pipe. "And what do you want to do, Alex?" he asked. "Not what they want you to do. What do you want?" Alex thought for a long time. He thought about the complex equations he had been working on, about the new problem Aris had presented to him, the nature of dark matter. He thought about the universe, a vast, beautiful, and unknowable place. He looked at the stars, a million distant points of light, and for the first time, they didn't just seem like a problem to be solved. They seemed like a mystery to be explored, a journey to be taken. "I want to explore," Alex said, his voice full of a new, quiet certainty. "I want to see what's out there." Aris smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "We'll explore." And with that simple, elegant statement, Alex's life took another turn. He wasn't just a boy who solved the universe. He was a boy who was ready to embark on a new adventure. The gradual rise was not a destination. It was a journey, and Alex was ready to see where it would take him. 15 years later, the name Dr. Alex Johnson was synonymous with a new era of physics. He was no longer the boy who solved the universe, but the architect of a new cosmology. His work, a direct continuation of the grand unification theory he had first presented at 10, had fundamentally reshaped humanity's understanding of space-time, matter, and the very fabric of reality. He was a leading figure at the same university that had first taken a chance on him, but now he held a prestigious endowed chair. His office was a testament to his success, a spacious, sun-drenched room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a sprawling whiteboard covered in a beautiful, intricate dance of equations. But what was most striking about the room was not the advanced technology or the rows of academic accolades, but the simple, framed photograph on his desk. A picture of a 10-year-old boy with a wide, earnest smile, standing at a podium. At 25, Alex had the quiet confidence of a man who had been operating at the highest levels of his field for over a decade. He was still the same person though. He still preferred quiet contemplation to loud parties, and his mind still worked in metaphors and visualizations. He would often close his eyes and imagine a problem, seeing it not as a series of numbers, but as a physical, tangible thing to be manipulated and understood. He was now mentoring his own team of graduate students and postdoctoral researchers, many of whom were older than him. They looked at him with the same awe and reverence that he once held for Aris, and he treated them with the same humility and respect. He was still just Alex, a boy who was good at physics. His parents, David and Marie, were now living in a beautiful, comfortable home not far from the university. David had retired from his maintenance job and was now a full-time, self-appointed consultant on his son's projects. He would visit Alex's lab and walk through the sprawling high-tech facilities, not as a tourist, but as a man with a fundamental understanding of how things worked. Alex had secured a major grant to design a new particle accelerator, a device so complex it required a small army of engineers to build. Alex had shown his father the schematics, a dense, technical document that was, to a normal person, completely incomprehensible. David had simply stared at them, his eyes scanning the diagrams, and had pointed to a single line. "Son," he said, his voice quiet, "this pipe here, it's not going to hold. You need a different kind of reinforcement. The pressure, it's going to be too much." Alex had looked at the schematics, at the line his father had pointed to, and a chill had run down his spine. David was right. The engineers had missed it. His father, the man who saw the world in broken pipes and faulty wiring, had just saved a multi-billion-dollar project from a catastrophic failure. David's wisdom, born not of books but of a lifetime of practical experience, was still a key part of Alex's work. And Eris? The professor had become an academic legend, a revered figure and a public intellectual. He had written best-selling books and lectured to sold-out crowds. But his greatest legacy, the one he was most proud of, was Alex. He still worked with Alex, but their relationship had shifted. It was now a partnership of equals, a beautiful, symbiotic exchange of ideas. Eris, with his lifetime of knowledge and wisdom, would help Alex frame his ideas in a way that was more accessible to the academic community, while Alex would help Eris see the world with fresh eyes, unburdened by the conventions of a lifetime of study. Eris was a frequent visitor to Alex's office, and the two would often sit for hours in a comfortable silence, just thinking. The ultimate breakthrough came, not in a grand conference or a loud, celebratory moment, but in the quiet of Alex's office late one night. He was working on a problem that had stumped him for years, a theory that posited a connection between consciousness and the very fabric of spacetime. It was a fringe theory, one that many of his colleagues dismissed as unscientific. He was looking at a set of equations that just wouldn't align, a variable that stubbornly refused to behave. He was about to give up when his mind went back to a story his father had told him a long time ago. A story about a car engine. "The engine isn't just a machine, son," David had said. "It has a personality. It's a part of you. If you listen to it, you can hear its story." Alex sat up straight. He looked at the equations, and for the first time he didn't see numbers. He saw a story. He saw a conversation between two variables, a delicate, intimate dance that was happening in a dimension he had never considered. He saw the problem not as a machine to be fixed, but as a life to be understood. He grabbed a fresh notebook and, in a furious, quiet dance of a pencil, he began to draw. He drew the two variables as two dancers, their movements elegant and intertwined, their relationship a kind of mathematical poetry. He wrote the equations as if he were writing music. He worked through the night, his mind a quiet hurricane of creativity and focus. By dawn he had done it. He had proved the theorem. He had connected the conscious mind to the universe itself. He looked at the proof, at the beautiful, elegant conclusion, and his eyes filled with tears. He had done what no one thought was possible. He had, in a way, solved the universe. But in that moment, in the quiet of his office, he realized that he hadn't really solved anything. He had just asked the right question. He had just listened to the story the universe was trying to tell him. He looked at the framed picture on his desk, at the face of the boy who had just presented a theorem, and he smiled. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond science, that the journey was not about solving. It was about listening. And as he looked out the window at the rising sun, at the world waking up to a new day, he knew that the greatest stories were not the ones that were told, but the ones that were just beginning. The boy who saw the world in equations had found his place in the universe, and it was a place of endless questions, a place of infinite wonder, a place he was destined to be. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.